This and all talks at the 2019 JavaScript for WordPress Conference are brought to you in part by our sponsors Pantheon, a high-performance hosting platform with agile developer tools. Check them out at pantheon.io.
Awesome. Welcome back, everybody. I hope all of you had a nice break. And I'm here with Pascal to talk some internationalization with Gutenberg. Pascal, who's going to be talking next, is a developer, programs engineer at Google, and a longtime WordPress core committer. He's also actively involved in the development of Gutenberg and WordPress CLI with a passion for improving the internationalization ecosystem. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Pascal. And
awesome. Hi, everyone. So yeah, my name's Pascal. Some of you might know me from some other WordCamp talks, WordCamp conferences, where I spoke about internationalization before. It's one of my passion projects, passion areas in WordPress, Gutenberg, WP CLI in general. Today's focus is internationalization within Gutenberg. So if you're developing a plugin that hooks into Gutenberg, if you're creating a custom block type for the new block editor, and you want to reach an international audience and not just English-speaking people, this talk is for you. So today we are covering a few things because internationalization is quite a huge area. So we're covering first of all the PHP internationalization side in WordPress. So like the basic things that you need to know when you create a plugin in WordPress. So because even if you create just a custom block for Gutenberg, you still have to have this PHP files to register all your scripts and styles and have some other areas there to actually load your translation. So we're gonna cover like the bare fundamentals that are needed to have fully functioning internationalization in the PHP side. And second, it's like the biggest part, of course, the JavaScript internationalization. I'm going to show you how this exactly works in the WordPress world. And the third part is about tying these things together. Once you have a fully internationalized plugin, it's about actually doing the translation work and making sure that this thing works. And after that, I want to give you along the way some best practices in the areas of internationalization and localization, because it's something that is dear to my heart. I want to make sure that what I say today sticks in your brains and that you're doing these things the right way. So that's why I want to show you some best practices in these areas. And last but not least, there are still some things in the WordPress and in Gutenberg areas regarding internationalization that don't work quite yet as expected, I would say. So sometimes they might not be as straightforward as you might think. So I want to briefly cover that as well. It's just because like Gutenberg development, WordPress development is always changing. There's always new things, and it's likely that next year there's going to be way more information that this talk covers. So this is like a peek at what's coming soon and what's still not fully there yet. Before we get started with this, before we dive straight into this, I want to quickly settle on the terminology. You might have heard of all these terms before, and I've mentioned them plenty of times now. But what do these words actually mean? So first of all, we have the internationalization. And internationalization is actually the process of making sure that your software is built in a way that it can easily be adapted to other cultures and languages. So this is not including any translation work whatsoever. It's just like the bare foundation for everything that follows. And second, oh yeah, and by the way, internationalization, it's such a hard word to pronounce, so we usually abbreviate it with I, H, and N. So 18 is like the number of characters between I and N. And next we have localization, which is the process of actually doing this part where you adapt the product or service to this specific or to a particular language and culture, to have this like desired local look and feel. In other words, something like the way I like to describe it is localization is like translation, but with a cultural twist to it. And this is something that you definitely should keep in mind during development, because like every language is different, every culture is different, and it's not just about translating word A into word B. There's way more to that. So let's start with WordPress plugin internationalization. So I assume most of you have developed a plugin for WordPress in the past, or are maybe in the process of doing so. If you write a WordPress plugin, the bare minimum that you probably should have is a simple PHP file and a README. So the README is like things like how to use the plugin and stuff. And the PHP file, like the main plugin file, as it's often called, contains things like the name and description and the version number of your plugin. This is usually something that you copy and paste, or use some generation tool to have like this boilerplate, because this stuff looks always the same. So for example, here I have my super awesome plugin that does nothing, and it's a version 1 of my plugin. I stripped out the code here. It's just about this first 10 lines or so of the plugin, which we call the plugin header, which includes, as I said, the name and description of the plugin. And also, interestingly, at the bottom there, you see the text domain. This is already something that has to do with internationalization, because every string that we want to be able to translate in our plugin, in our block, needs to be somehow tied to our plugin, because otherwise it's just a sentence, just a word. So every time we have such a sentence, such a string, we use the text domain along with it. So in my case, so if we go back to folder structure, we have my-plugin, and the text domain is actually the same as the folder name, so it's also my-plugin. And now that we have our basic foundation for the plugin, we can start with development. And for this, we're probably going to have some, I don't know, some logic to create some classes and do some stuff, and then we have the internationalization functions. And you might already be familiar with those. It's like the double underscore function. There's also underscore E, which is same as the double underscore function, but it directly prints the string to the output instead of like just passing it somewhere. We also have the underscore X function, which is similar to the first one, but it allows you to add a context to a string. This is especially useful when a string can have different meanings depending on where it's used. So for this slide here, I chose the word update, because update can mean perform an update or there's an update available. So in both sentences, it's either a noun or a verb. And in order to not confuse translators, we can add a context so it's clear that this string is a verb or a noun. And of course, you can also use this in some other areas. For example, to say, hey, this string is used in this area of the plugin or of the block. And last, we have the _n function, which is needed when you have a string or a text that changes depending on the amount of some items. So in this case, whether it's one comment on your blog post or if there are 10 comments on your blog post. And the specific thing about this function is that you need to pass the number, obviously, to this function, because otherwise it doesn't know whether to pick the first or the second version. And as you can see in each of these examples, we have the text domain of our plugin so that it's clear that these are basically our strings. And here you can also see another example of the __ and the _n function together with the sprintf function, which allows us to use some placeholders in our strings. So, for example, if I have something like hello and then your first name, or like in the WordPress admin bar where you have like howdy and then your name. And similar to before's example where we have an amount of comments, we somehow need to replace this placeholder with the actual number. So we have the sprintf function and _n, where we pass the number, so we can A, replace the placeholder, and B, pass the correct number to the internationalization function so it can decide which string to use. Now, these functions have been in WordPress, they've been around for like ages, at least 10 years or so. Everyone is used to those. So once Gutenberg started being developed, the thinking was, ideally, we want to make it, development of the JavaScript parts as easy as possible and as similar as possible to the PHP part. So you can see in a bit that the JavaScript API is actually quite similar. But before we start with that, we first need to create some JavaScript. So we start with a little block that we can develop. It's a super simple example that I made on the slides. So we have our my-plugin folder, and then in a source folder have some JavaScript files. You might have seen other examples of custom Gutenberg blocks somewhere on GitHub, on the web, on Twitter, etc., where it's usually just one JavaScript file. Nowadays, for example, Gutenberg itself started to split these things up into multiple files. So we have a block.json file with some metadata for the block, like all the attributes that the block has are in there. Then the index file has all the main stuff, and then the edit and save functions of the block are separated into their own files as well. So the index file, for example, would look like this, where we have imports for the edit and save function. We also import the metadata from the JSON file. And you also, similar to the plugin before, you have like a title and description and also some keywords to describe this block. As you can see, I didn't add any translation functions to this just yet. So as I mentioned before, we tried, or WordPress community tried to make the JavaScript internationalization API similar to the one that was already available in PHP. And what the end results you can now use in your own plugins by using the WordPress/i18n library package. This package is part of the Gutenberg repository on GitHub. Let me just find the link. I can share it in chat with you. Here we go. So, and when you import this package in your JavaScript files, you basically end up having similar functions like in PHP. So we have the double underscore functions, the _x, the _n function, and the sprintf function. There are two notable things here. First of all, there is no _e function to directly print a string, because that's not how things work in JavaScript. Basically, it's not possible to have such a function. And second, sprintf is actually, it's not a native function in JavaScript, but it's such a useful helper utility to replace placeholders and strings. It's like it's used in PHP and in other languages as well. So this is like a JavaScript port of the same function, so that you don't have to learn anything else, anything new. It's the same API basically. So to give you an example, again with the _n function, so you would import sprintf and the _n function, and then you can add, or you can use this in your code like this. So I chose number of heads. You either have 1 head or 4 heads or 10 heads. And this would just return a string with the correctly formatted and replaced string. So when we go back to the previous example from our index.js file from our blog, I now replaced all the static texts with text that uses these internationalization functions. So as you can see, the block title and the description and keywords, they now use the __ function. And all I had to do for this is to import the translation utility from the i18n package. So to briefly recap, this is basically all that you need in your code to have an internationalization ready, a fully internationalized plugin or block. And the fun part is now the localization part. How do we get from this prepared plugin, prepared files, to actually having a fully translated and fully localized product in your browser? So let's have a look at the localization part of things. And I'm going to start with loading the translations, because that's the easy part. So let's just imagine for a second we have this fully internationalized plugin. We hired some translation agency to do all the localization work, and now we have all the translations. Or let's imagine we created this super awesome WordPress plugin and we uploaded it to WordPress.org, and now it's been translated by the community, and we have all these translations that we need to load. So how do we do this? And the PHP side of things, you might be familiar with the function load_plugin text domain. This function, you pass basically the text domain of your plugin and the folder where the languages can be found. then you just run this plugin on the init hook. Now, the good thing is, so because I mentioned WordPress.org, the good thing is if your plugin is hosted on WordPress.org, like Akismet, like Chatback, like WooCommerce, etc., you don't actually need this function anymore, because nowadays WordPress does this for you automatically, because it will automatically look for translations inside the WP content/languages folder of your WordPress site, in case it encounters some translatable string. So this function is really only useful if it's like a self-hosted private plugin for your clients or etc. And next, we have the same or like a similar API for JavaScript files. So we have somewhere in our plugin, we have this WP enqueue script function, and a new thing that's been available since WordPress 5.0 is WP set script translations. It's similar to the load plugin text domain function. The main difference is that you have to pass the script handler. So this function, you pass the script handle, you pass the plugin text domain, and the third parameter is the directory where your translations reside in. Again, or here you don't need this, at least you don't need to pass the directory when your plugin is hosted on WordPress.org. You still need to call this function no matter what. So that's not automated, basically not possible to automate. But in a nutshell, WP set script translations connects your script handle with your text domain and gives WordPress an idea where to look for translations. What this function does under the hood, or eventually what WordPress does, it calls another function from the i18n package. It's called set local data. So this function takes a map of translatable strings and translations and adds those to the translation pool for the my-plugin text domain. Of course, you could theoretically use that function yourself, this set local data function, but you don't have to. So this WP set script translations function does this for you, and it actually runs this set local data in an inline script for you under the hood, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so this is really all that you need to know about loading translations. But the important part, or like the more tricky part, is how do we get to the actual part where we have translations? Like, how do we get there? And for this, we need to actually have something that we can translate. And for this, we need to first find all the strings that can be translated from our source code. So all the files, JavaScript files and PHP files, we need to search these and find all the places where we use these underscore functions, etc. Oh, and by the way, this is also not really applicable if your plugin is hosted on WordPress.org, because WordPress.org does this automatically for you, and it will then give you these strings automatically to translate to WordPress.org. So again, this is something that's mostly useful for privately hosted plugins that are not on WordPress.org. So string extraction, you have to think of it as a parser. It's a parser that scans your files and looks for all these functions. It does not execute your code. That's very important. You cannot have any variables in your translatable strings, because those won't exist in a parser. It doesn't know what these variables context are. It's basically just reads your files. Now, luckily, we don't have to do this manually. The recommended way to do the string extraction, and also the most common option, is by using WP CLI, which is the official command line tool for WordPress. If you're not using it already, you can download it from wpcli.org. And this handy command line utility contains an i18n command that allows you to create so-called POT files based on your source code. I won't go into detail about these POT files necessarily, and about their format, but they essentially contain a list of all translatable strings in your project. Another option that has originally been created for use by Gutenberg is a Babel plugin to create these POT files. It has since been created for originally it's been created for Gutenberg, but it's actually not used by Gutenberg anymore. But still, some people might be using it. So it's a Babel plugin. So if you don't know Babel, it's like a transpiler for JavaScript. So it takes your original JavaScript and like turns it into something else. And during that process, this plugin extracts all the translatable strings and creates this POT file. Sounds quite handy, but there are some drawbacks. So maybe later on I can do a little demo where we can see why the plugin might be useful, but currently isn't of much value as one might think. All right, I'm just posting the link to WP CLI here in the chat in case you want to install it, and also the link to the Make Hot Babel plugin in case you want to check it out as well. So let's get back to my slides. Yeah, I forgot. So Babel plugin, if you want to use it, it's similar to the i18n package. You can install it using npm. It's called WordPress/Babel plugin make hot. So no matter which function used, you're gonna end up with a POT file that has the same name as your text domain or your plugin folder. In this case, it's my-plugin. And this is really the result of this string extraction. This POT file contains all the translation, all the translatable strings from our project. This could be tens, could be hundreds. The bare minimum it contains is actually, if you remember from before, from the plugin header, the name and the description. So because in WordPress, those are translatable as well. This POT file will also contain these strings because one can translate the plugin description in WordPress. So this is really just the so-called translation catalog. It's just an index of strings that can be translated. But now we need to do the actual localization. So for example, I would use it to, in this step, I would translate all these sentences into German. A pretty popular tool for doing so is POEdit. POEdit is an open source software. It has been around for years, and it's actually quite tailored to WordPress plugins and themes, because so many WordPress people use it. An alternative, of course, if your plugin is hosted on webs.org or somewhere else, is by using translate.wordpress.org. or by using the underlying software of that, which is WordPress. It's like an online version of PO Edit, powered by WordPress. So I'm not going into detail how the tools work, but what they do is, once you finish the translation, you're not only going to have a POT file, but also PO and MO files. A PO file is like the POT file with not only the index, but also the actual translations in it. And the MO file is a machine-readable version of that. And as you can see, the file name contains not only the plugin text domain, but also the locale of the translation. So in this example, I translated the plugin into German as spoken in Germany. That's why there's like DE_DE. Now, this is usually all that you have to do for translation and localization of a regular PHP WordPress plugin. For the JavaScript part, everything is a little bit different, because you actually need to have translation files that can be read by JavaScript. And as I mentioned, the MO files are machine readable. It's like binary hex code whatsoever. That's not really readable by JavaScript. So in WordPress, what we allow you to do, or what we came up with, is that you need to have JSON files that contain your translations. And again, we created a WP CLI command to create these JSON files. It's very simple. It's WP i18n make-JSON. And what this command basically does, it goes through your PO files, finds all the strings that belong to some JavaScript, and puts these JavaScript strings into JSON files. In the end, you're gonna have some folder structure that looks like here on the screen. You have the POT files, the same PO and MO files as before, and then some JSON files. Now here I put two versions of these JSON files as an example. The first example is a JSON file that contains the name of the script handle that we used for the WP enqueue script function for. And the second one is another version, another variant of this same file, but it contains an MD5 hash of the path of where this the original JavaScript file resides. The reason for that is, let's assume that your plugin is on WordPress.org, and when WordPress.org translates your plugin and creates the translations, it does not know your script handle. All it knows is where your JavaScript file is. And after that, or in the other side, in your WordPress site, WordPress will compare the JSON files with the path of the JavaScript files it loads. But because that's not easily readable, the other version or the other option is to use the script handle in this JSON file name. Right now we're going to focus on the script handle version, but this is just like a note for you to know that this that both versions are supported by WordPress. So to recap, we now have covered the bare fundamentals of all the translation functions in both PHP and JavaScript. I've showed you how to enqueue scripts and load the translations using load plugin text domain and WP set script translations, and the tools that are needed to turn the internationalized product in a fully localized one. by performing the string extraction and the localization steps that are needed for this. Next, I want to briefly cover some best practices for this part, and then go through the caveats that I mentioned earlier. And I think after that, we still might have time for a little demo. So the first best practice I want to share with you is basically a reminder that string extraction is opposite of code execution. So WPCLI does not run your code, and it means that you cannot translate any variable, or you cannot use some other translation function, because WPCLI will only look for the __ function, and it doesn't know what else there is. So you cannot put some text into a variable and then translate it. That doesn't work. Another thing that I actually encounter quite often is string concatenation. This is a rather simple example where a number is concatenated with the word, in this case items, to end up with amount of items. The problem with that is it doesn't work with every language there is in the world. And especially when you concatenate other words together in sentences, you lose important context, which are a future value for translators. So string concatenation is really a bad thing to do in I-89. Just give you an example of why string concatenation is really harmful. Let's say we try to fix this issue by using sprintf to put these things together. Looks already much better. But of course, this doesn't handle the case where there's only one item. So you might think that you can just use a simple case where, like, if there's one item, display like placeholder item, and if there's more, like use items. This might work in English. This might work in German. Unfortunately, fortunately, in some languages, counting is a bit more tricky than in English. So let's say in Polish or another language, another different form is used depending on whether it's an odd or even amount of items. And in this case, you cannot use a simple if-else statement. So that's why we need this _n functions. That's why we need these dedicated functions for translating these plural forms. And this provides necessary context for translators, and they know, like, oh, this is a place where there can be multiple items, and they can have a singular and a plural, and maybe like another plural translation as well. So this is really, really helpful for them. So to give you an example, if you check the screen here, you have 3 examples of using printf or sprintf with 3 different numbers, 1, 2, and 5. And in some languages with more complicated plural forms, all these 3 examples might provide different output. And that's why a simple if-else statement doesn't work. Next, we have context. I briefly mentioned it before already. There can be times where strings can be a bit ambiguous. Some cases where it's where it can be a verb or a noun. If you use the same underscore function with the word update for both scenarios where it's a verb and a noun, the translation system will only have one string to translate, and translators can only localize one form. You don't know that there's like two separate use cases. So with the context, you can actually distinguish these two forms and allow the translation function and string extraction to actually generate two different entries. Another interesting aspect of internationalization are dates and units. It's very important. So this is sometimes more ties into like user interface aspect of internationalization. However, it's like nonetheless very important to never hard code currencies, units, or date and time formats, because these will always be different per locale. So if, for example, 5 p.m. in one culture will be 17 o'clock in the other, or when talking about time zones, 5 p.m. in one country might actually be 10 o'clock in the morning somewhere else. Right. Next, I want to point out a little nifty utility. There's a bit hidden currently in the WPCLI i18n command. This command has, like all commands in WPCLI, has a debug flag. And when you use the debug flag during the string extraction, it allows you to, it shows you some more context about what happens during string extraction. And this command will tell you if some strings are ambiguous, if some strings have missing placeholder comments, translator comments, etc. So I really suggest you to try out this debug flag. So this is already the last section, and I think we're good in time. It means no demo, unfortunately, but I will give you some further resources anyway after that. So caveats. So there are some things, as I mentioned at the beginning, that are still not fully fleshed out in the string extraction and in the localization and internationalization parts in WordPress. The first thing is string extraction from source files. So usually nowadays in modern JavaScript world is we have this super amazing, beautiful JavaScript code, and then we have a build step. It turns this JavaScript code in like some super minified and super fast and browser compatible JavaScript. When you publish your plugin on works.org, all there is in this plugin is this minified JavaScript. So what WPCLI does, it scans this minified JavaScript to find all these translatable strings. And when you translate a plugin or WordPress core itself, for every string, there's a possibility to check its location in source code. Because maybe you need to find out where this string is used exactly to have a better understanding. The problem is, because of the string extraction, this will just point to a minified JavaScript file, which is not very feasible, not readable at all. So an option would be to use the string extraction on the actual source files. So you have the correct source when doing the string extraction, and later on when you translate, you have the correct source. However, this currently is not easily doable because you need to, like when WordPress looks for translations, it doesn't know where your source files were. It only has the build files. So this is something that is a bit tricky at the moment. It's very unfortunate, but there might be solutions in the future where we can make string extraction from source files better and tie them more together with the build file extraction. The next thing is something that is currently in development in Gutenberg, and it's string interpolation. To give you an example of what that means, in WordPress we often have code like this sprint f function, and then some text that says check out this super awesome link. And oh yeah, this, by the way, this text should be translated. I think I forgot to add it. So check out this super awesome link, and link is within an anchor tag. And when you're a translator, you see that you have the full sentence, you can easily translate it, and you know that the word link needs to be within anchor tags. You cannot do the same really in JavaScript, because every JavaScript that you add to the DOM would be automatically escaped by the browser, unless you use some things like React functions like dangerously set inner HTML, and as the name implies, that is a bit dangerous. So right now there is no way to have functionality like this in Gutenberg, where we can have a full sentence with some HTML tags within and have that text to be translatable. However, so work is currently being done to have some sort of interpolation component in React, where you use that component to write similar string and similar text, where you can still use HTML tags in your text in a more secure way. There's currently pull requests for that open, but I'm going to send you the link to the GitHub issue instead, because that's actually where all the discussion is happening. Another big thing that happens in Gutenberg recently is the RFC, or the request for comment, for block type registration. This block type registration is basically that part, the missing part in Gutenberg that allows you to finally have some server-side awareness of blocks, because right now it's all client-side. And one part of this one aspect of this RFC is to have these block.json files that contain the name, or should contain the name and description of your plugin as well. So this RFC is on GitHub. I think I can share the link in the chat as well. So the problem with that is, so this block.json file basically works similar to the plugin header and the plugin metadata in the main plugin file, which means WP CLI needs to extract names and descriptions, etc., from this JSON files as well, and that's currently not possible. So this is something that we're looking to add in the near future, to make this block type registration actually feasible in WordPress and for all Gutenberg block developers. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you very much for spending your time here and sharing all your insights with us.
Well, thanks for having me, and yeah, have a good day, and thanks everyone for chiming in.